I invite Ross Berbeco, my colleague and friend, to present his talk.
Thank you, Mandar. Some really excellent talks today. I'd like to thank the organizers and especially my colleague, Will for putting this together. He's done a really amazing job here, and we're all very fortunate to be a part of it. So now we're going to talk about some specific scientific collaborations with some potential for making an impact in global health. So while this is kind of a technical talk, I promise there will be no formulas. Well, maybe one or two. So this project is born out of many years of collaboration with Varian Medical Systems. Thank you, Dow, wherever you are. Varian-funded projects as well as NCI-funded projects to do some of this research that I'm going to show you. So beginning with radiation therapy, just a brief primer. Dow showed some images earlier of a clinical linear accelerator. That's what this is right here. And this is kind of the workhorse of radiation therapy. And so I wanted to give a little tour of what's going on here. First of all, there's the radiation delivery device itself, which is coming out of here. There's image guidance tools, including low energy and high energy X-rays. And offline in another room altogether, there's a whole treatment planning platform and activity that's going on. And each of these components can be very expensive and time intensive and training intensive. And in each of these areas, there's opportunity for developing low-cost solutions. And so I believe right after this talk, Dr. Eric Ford will be talking about the radiation delivery side, and tomorrow Lawrence Court will be talking about the treatment planning work that he has done. And so for this talk, I'm going to focus only on the image guidance piece and how to improve that, hopefully. So what is image guidance in radiation therapy? Let's see if this will work. So here, apologies, Dow, for stealing your graphic. Here is a video showing an image-guided radiation therapy treatment. So here you see the low-energy X-ray tube there swinging around here, and here comes the low-energy X-ray beam, and here's a flat panel detector. And so capturing X-ray projections from 360 degrees as the gantry moves around, these can then be reconstructed, and the volumes, the treatment volumes can be visualized, and the physician or therapist can line the patient up and then can move the treatment couch to make sure that the tumor is in the right place, and so the treatment can proceed safely. All right, let's get out of there. Okay. So is this important? Is this image guidance necessary? Well, it's been demonstrated that image guidance can save lives and reduce toxicities. On the left here, you can see the mistakes or the setup errors that can occur without image guidance on the order of several centimeters. And on the right, when you incorporate online image guidance, you reduce those to the level of millimeters. And what does this increased precision mean? Well, it translates to fewer toxicities in the patients, fewer marginal misses, so hopefully less incidence of local recurrence. And then it allows the clinicians to perform dose escalation, more radiation dose for the tumor in these high-dose, fewer fraction treatments, which provide really much better outcomes. So while this image guidance is really important, it's not consistently available or used in all settings. Some impediments include the cost of this equipment, as well as the service required for this equipment and training to use it. So for example, here you can see if this is a linear accelerator and you've got your source here and your panel here, you also have an X-ray generator being used to drive this X-ray source, probably water cooled, so you've got some water pumping action. You've got your acquisition hardware in another room. And so you have all these different components. These are on these robotic arms that I showed in that video. And if any one of these has an issue, then your image guidance is down. And the consequences of that could be unsafe or less effective treatments and perhaps extended downtime, and that translates into the patient care. So should we remove the kilovoltage imager, those arms that extend out, and it's almost like moving back in time to 2 decades ago when all we used was this megavoltage imager, so using the high energy treatment beam for our imaging. Well, let's examine this. One, what are some consequences of this? Well, you would reduce the purchase costs of the device, reduce the service costs, as I just explained, potentially reducing downtime, and reduce some infrastructure requirements needed to house all that other equipment. So what are the benefits, clinical benefits of this, using this beam, the MV beam? Well, you'd have improved penetration for thicker anatomy. You could have reduced beam hardening and metal artifacts, and better HU or Hounsfield unit accuracy for adaptive radiation therapy procedures. However, there are some key technical challenges, including the physics of these MV X-rays, and the detector itself has some key limitations. So one approach that I'm going to be discussing here today is to use a lower energy beam, so to overcome some of those physics issues. And I'll talk about the design and development and testing of a high energy, a high efficiency imager that we've performed with Varian Medical Systems. And that's this right down here. So the current MV imager, just to give you a brief tour of it, is composed of 3 layers. One, a copper filter, followed by a scintillator, which turns the X-rays into optical light, which can then be absorbed by this photon detector array here, which is not unlike the camera on your phone. So this design is roughly 2 decades old and hasn't really changed much in that time period. And it's generally a low efficiency, so 1 to 1.5% at these high energy beams. So what would these cone beam CT images look like with this detector? So with a current detector, and this is what an acquisition would look like. So here you see rotating around. Now, instead of using these arms, you're using the treatment beam itself, and you're capturing the output here in this panel. And so this is what it would look like with the current imager. This is just a contrast phantom, which is used to test what different materials of different densities would look like. And so at the same radiation dose, this is the current imager, which you can see is very noisy, and you're missing a lot of low density objects, which could be important in patients. And this is what the KV, the current standard KV, would look like, which you can see has much less noise, and you can identify these low density objects. So it seems like there's work to be done, and that's why many people have concluded that the current MV imager is just not sufficient for clinical image guidance. Oops, let's move on here. So one step in this direction that we've taken is to design a prototype for layer design. Now this is just taking the standard detector that I just described and adding 3 more of the same layers on it. And what this does is, by adding these other layers, you're capturing 4 times as much of the radiation. So you can capture this, either the same image with 4 times less dose, or you can get better images with the same dose. And this is a device that has been built by Varian, and we have the prototype here across the street in our clinic, and we're able to mount it on our linear accelerators here. And so what do these images look like? So again, here's the standard imager here, and now we're looking at a lower energy, which is available on our clinical linear accelerators, 2.5 MV, and you can see that it's noisy, and it's hard to identify some of these low density objects. Now with our novel multi-layer imager here in the middle, this is all at the same dose levels. Now it's much less noisy, and you can start to identify some of these low density objects. However, we're still not quite at the level of the KV cone beam CT, but we're definitely much closer, and we're getting there. This is what it would look like this is an anthropomorphic pelvis, so this is designed to look like a human anatomy, and you can see with a standard imager, it's quite noisy, and with many artifacts surrounding the bone here. However, with a new imager, it's much cleaned up, and you can see the anatomy much better. So what other fun things can you do with this detector? Well, because it has 4 layers, and each 4th layer can be read out independently, and each layer has a copper filter above it, we recognize that each layer is actually seeing a different part of the spectrum of this MV beam that's coming in. The MV beam coming in is composed of photons of many different energies, and each layer is seeing a different part of that spectrum. And by doing some weighting of the images from each layer, you can start to do some things like identifying certain materials and then bringing them to the fore. For example, here, this is a pelvis phantom with implanted gold markers, which we often use in patients, and you can see that they're very difficult to detect with a standard imager. However, because they're gold and we know they're gold, we can apply a weighting scheme here to bring out the gold, which has a different density than the tissue and the bone, and we can now identify the markers much more clearly. Here you can see them zoomed in here, and this is looking from the front and this is looking from the side. And so by employing this multi-energy imaging on the same detector, we can start to do some interesting things, improving the imaging in a way that we couldn't do with KV imaging. We're also looking at some other alternatives, including low-cost materials, like scintillating glass, and this is something we published earlier this year. Again, this is still work with Varian. Using a pixelated scintillating glass, it's 6 times more efficient than that single layer that I described earlier. And so now, again, looking at the standard imager here, very noisy, again, can't see these low-density objects. And now with the LKH5, much less noisy, and you really can start to see these objects. And you'd see that with this new scintillating material, we're getting very close to the KV cone beam. Well, now that we have these 2 alternatives, why not put them together, right? So we have our standard imager, which is Gauss, which is low efficiency but high resolution, and that LKH5 I described, which is high efficiency but low resolution. If you put them together on the same panel, then you get the best of both worlds. You can get high resolution, high efficiency, which translates to lower dose imager, and that's something we're investigating right now. Some additional MV imaging applications that I'm not really going to talk about today, but again, this is work over the past, say, 15 plus years with Varian, is using in-treatment verification. Here you can see we can identify a lung tumor in real time and track it. And once you do know where it is, then you can apply tumor tracking, so you can follow the tumor in real time. This technology can also be used for quality assurance, capturing the exit radiation so you know what you treated, and then you can translate that to make sure that you have the highest quality treatment. And then you can use that information as well to perform adaptive radiotherapy so that each treatment day you know how much dose you're giving, and then you can change your plan to make sure that at the end you arrive at the dose distribution that you had planned for. So while this is the win-win session, I really see this as a win-win win scenario. My apologies. So involving industry, the local cancer centers, and then the patients themselves. For industry, you have reduced manufacturing costs, a simpler system, potentially the possibility of selling more units. For the cancer centers, that reduced manufacturing costs could be passed on to them, as well as reduced service costs and reduced space requirements, but with the same functionality is what we're going for here. We want the same functionality because we want the same ability to treat precisely for the patients. And so for the patients, you have greater machine access. If you have less downtime, you have that precision medicine, and that will all translate into better outcomes. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge all the people here who have worked on this project, as well as our partners with Varian, the NIH, NCI for their funding, and Varian for their support. Thank you.